Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Coffee and Contracts. I'm your co-host, Rusty Witten, affiliate broker at Car Commercial Realty. I'm super excited about today's episode. We've been planning this one for a while. I'm glad we can finally get it done. I got my guy, Crowl from Nashville Dental with me today. Wanted to talk about setting up a dentistry practice from a business and an equipment standpoint. So I got my guy here with me today. Matt, how are you, buddy?
Man, doing awesome. Appreciate you having me, Rusty. Yeah, we've been talking about this for a good minute here, so really good to be on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. So tell the people about yourself, kind of your history, your background. You're super versed in the business of dentistry. So why don't you give the people a little bit of background?
Yeah, so I started in the business in 2008 and was not looking to get into dentistry. You know, there's an old joke in our industry that if you spend 5 years in dentistry, you'll never want to do anything else, and that's been the exact case for me. My background is in business and finance, and I grew up in a household of bankers and was the only one that didn't want to be a banker. My grandfather was the first pharmaceutical rep in the state of Tennessee back when you had to be a pharmacist, and so wow. I got to kind of watch him, take care of clients and support patients in that manner. And it really stuck with me. And I got super fortunate, sometimes the best things come out of hard times. And, we had the 2008 recession, and I had accepted a position to go into the medical field as a junior medical rep. And all the companies, Stryker and Medtronic, to name a few, that, I was in the recruitment process with, kind of shut down their recruitment. And during that time, I had a good friend who's still in the industry today, Brian Hurley, over at Dexis. At the time was an instrumentarium, and he made a recommendation, and I got recommended into Henry Schein, and started talking to them, and quickly found out about, what a world-class training environment they had. John Chatham, who's an industry, icon, built just a world training career development program. And so I went in and spent, several weeks at Wisconsin at the time, which Henry Schein was headquartered after the Sullivan Schein merger, and just fell in love with dentistry, fell in love with the process of supporting patients, was supported by just a wonderful training program, and spent almost 17 years with Henry Schein until December of this year. Made the move over to Nashville Dental, and wanted to get to a family-owned, more of a regional footprint, supporting private practices only. I've spent, my career in private practice and DSO, and I truly, have learned so much in both. But I figured that out for myself that private practice is what I really want to support. And I think there's some great DSOs out there, and I think there's some great private practices, and everybody has their part of the industry. And for me, private practice is just, what's nearest and dearest to me. And maybe that's in the background for my granddad supporting that and whatnot, and just what I know. But yeah, it's been amazing at Nashville Dental since December.
Good for you, man. That's awesome. And I know you and I connected kind of before that transition, so I got to walk with you through that, and excited to see that for you and just continued growth, man. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. We share some commonality. We're both graduates of the greatest university in the land, that'd be Mississippi State, Hail State, buddy. We want to start there for sure. And then I know we're both coffee drinkers, man. So tell me, where's your coffee spot? What's your go-to coffee drink?
Man, I'm a big fan of Black Rifle and what they're doing. I feel like, I did not serve in any capacity, but I have just such a deep love for our armed forces, and I love what Black Rifle's doing. For me, it's Black Rifle and a touch of almond milk and a little honey to sweeten it up. And I'm not a purist. I can't do it just straight up, but love what Black Rifle's doing, love what they stand for. And especially, a couple days before America 250, man, what an awesome company. I'll give Black Rifle a little plug here.
Yeah, absolutely. Shameless plug. Sponsor the show if you're listening to Black Rifle for sure. I got a little Vaza working this afternoon as to get me through the rest of this day. And I'm just a black coffee guy. Like, I might put a little local honey in there for my allergies from time to time. And I heard you mention something about ring. Were you going to talk about a cowbell there for a second?
Yeah, man. Ring it.
You talk about one of these? Because mine is always in arm's
Ring it.
reach, baby.
That's
Always,
right.
always representing Mississippi State, man, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife just was given a cowboy bell to decorate. She's an artist in her free time, and I reminded her that you can't buy your first cowbell. You got to be gifted it. So yeah.
Yeah, mine will always be special. My grandmother, I grew up in an Alabama household. I think I told you that. Everybody's huge Alabama fans, and I was the first one that actually went to a major college that was in Alabama. And I'm moving in, and her and my mom leave to go get lunch, and while they're out, she's like, I heard somebody's supposed to buy you your cowbell as a gift. And I was like, yeah, that's what everybody says. And she hands me a cowbell in my apartment there in Starkville. So just a special cowbell that'll always be with me from my grandmother for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, man, but I brought you on today because I wanted to talk about what you mentioned a few minutes ago, and that's starting a private practice. DSOs kind of have it figured out. They've got these little dock in a box where they can throw up pretty easily. But there are so many questions for young dentists coming out of school that are in associateships that may not understand what the process looks like to start their own practice. And I know from your role, you're pretty heavily involved in the startup of a practice, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing we can do as kind of business consultants is, take a step back, look at the situation independently of anything outside of what the doctor's, he or she's trying to do, right? And that can be a de novo, that can be, a purchase of a retiring doctor, that can be partnering in a practice. Right now, I would say the transition of our younger doctors coming into our industry, kind of taking the reins from that next generation is really the elephant in the room for us. As a country, we're dealing with the baby boom generation coming out of the workforce in stages, and that's certainly true in the dental industry overall. We're seeing just a number of doctors that are hitting that retirement age, and they don't know what to do. And in some areas, that has, put fuel to the fire of the DSO. And no matter what your opinion on it is, good, bad, right, wrong, those things are coming out because the transition process has created that. Right. And I think the more we educate our younger doctors on how to start a practice effectively to fit their needs and their lifestyle and the type of dentistry that they want to do, then the better the industry is going to be as a whole, the better oral health is going to be as a whole.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point because it's always going to ebb and flow. There's going to be times where it's going to be DSO heavy. There's going to be times where it's private practice heavy. I saw that in my previous clinical career. But private practices are always going to be kind of the backbone of the American workforce, right? Just because they're the bootstrap people, they're the entrepreneurs. And again, no offense to any DSOs out there, but these are people that are willing to put their skin in the game, put their neck on the hypothetical line here to go out and start something, hang their own shingle, whether that's purchasing a practice that's already there or just starting a de novo that you mentioned earlier from scratch. What do these young dentists and associates, where should they start? What's the first steps if they're looking to start their own private practice?
Yeah, I believe the first thing they should do is to dive into their personal network, dive into the network at school, at their dental school, dive into their personal network, and just start to connect with business professionals. I'll say generally, if a D3 or a D4 student or an associate starts to dive into their network, they're going to get pointed in a direction that I feel like eventually they're going to land in somebody's lap, so to speak. It might be that, an older doctor has, maybe has a relationship with me as a client and says, hey, you really ought to talk to Matt, or you really ought to talk to your local territory representative, whether that's a Shine, a Patterson, hopefully it's Nashville Dental, right? Or, it could be a situation where somebody has recently done a deal with, a bank like a Live Oak or a Provide, or they've encountered your services at CAR. I feel like if they get to a professional, then our industry is such that we have such a great care and for those professionals. That somebody's going to stand up and say, hey, you know what, you really need to get in the hands of this person or that person. So I think the first thing is just raising your hand and saying, hey, I need to try to understand this.
Yeah, absolutely. And go into your network is such a powerful first step because you're going to people you trust who have worked with people who can tell you that they trust these other people, whether it's a lender, whether it's an equipment rep. And you're going to need a whole team there, from a realtor to a supply rep to a banker to a CPA or a financial planner, to kind of get the pathway started. And there's so many cogs in this machine that you really want to have kind of a robust team around you. I'm sure you agree, Matt. You don't want just like one stop shop. Like, you're going to need a real estate agent. You're going to need a banker. You're going to need people that can help you navigate the finances. But when you get us all in a room together and communicating, that's when you're most set up for success. Because if you and I can connect early and you understand what kind of flow and equipment works for a young dentist starting out, that can then help me go make sure we get the right space for them, to where then we can start planning what the footprint will actually look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell people this all the time. Like your financial planner, we really should be starting this from the back end of the career forward, and discussing, what is career success look like for you, and so many times career success really is undefined. Somebody says, well, I want to be successful. Okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that I want, to, work independently of anybody else? Does that mean I want to work in partnership? Does that mean that, I want to make a great income for my family? Does that mean I want to be able to give away X number of dollars to a charity? Like, what does that look like? And if I understand that, then we have a better ability to plan for that success. If somebody tells me that, hey, I want to do cosmetic dentistry and I don't want to be on, any PPO plan, and, I want to bill independently of insurance, well, then, I probably don't need to go into, a really rural area, right? I probably don't need to go into an area where, I've got maybe one or two large employers that are backed up by a PPO, so a lot of those decision-making processes really need to start from the back to the front, and not from, I want to get out and I want to start making income. It really needs to be what's the longevity of my career look like, and how am I going to go from being a student or an associate to, being a veteran, doctor in an area.
Yeah, a couple comments on that. I'm a huge Stephen Covey guy. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People have completely radicalized my life and changed my outlook. Our company gave that to us as a Christmas present. It was a good reminder from years ago when I read it. But he talks about begin with the end in mind. That's one of his critical pillars. And if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And it looks different, to the other point, to each person, right? There may be some people that listen to this that are an associate or a D3, D4 that are coming out saying, I'm going to be the next regional DSO. I'm going to be the one that is running all of West Tennessee, Northeast Arkansas, Missouri, whatever, wherever your footprint is. But there may be some that's like, you know what? I want to make a good living for my family. Maybe it's a mom. They're going to be a mom. They want to have multiple kids, but they want to have their own practice they can hang their name on and be proud of. But it's just going to be one practice in Memphis, in, Murfreesboro, in wherever. And that conversation needs to be had at the beginning, because that pathway looks completely different for those two individuals. If you're looking to grow and be a massive footprint, there's one direction you'll have to go versus somebody who's wanting to open a singular practice. And it all starts with having the conversations with the right people at the very beginning, to your point, Matt, when talking to financial planners.
Yeah, I just think it's so critical. I mean, if we don't know what success looks like, how can we try to build for it?
Yeah, for sure. And so kind of talking about that, you've been successful in helping launch countless practices over the years with your clients, new clients, people that come to you. How has the process of opening a dental clinic changed over the years? And what should, new entrepreneurs be looking out for?
Yeah, I think it's an awesome question, because it has changed, and I think it's constantly evolving. And it evolves, geographically, right? So I think the biggest thing that we saw was, back years ago, a doctor would come out and they would hang a shingle and start seeing patients, right? And we don't see that anymore. And what we now see is, there's kind of a couple of different pathways, right? There's the pathway of, I'm going to come out of school, and depending on how I have financed my education, might mean that, I go into an associateship early, right? Maybe that's a 1 to 3, maybe 5 year window of I want to build my skills. I want to pay back some debt. I want to kind of get myself in a really good standing. And then I want to go do a de novo, or then I want to go, buy a practice and whatnot. So I think the biggest thing that has changed is that associateship, right? Where we've got doctors coming out now, and instead of looking to start a practice immediately, they're going into associateship, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, in your opinion on that, I think that's the common thing we see. And so then it is, okay, do I want to stay in the practice I'm in? Do I have that opportunity to partner in the practice I'm in? Maybe I do, and maybe it's a smoother transition, or maybe it's I've learned a lot in the practice I'm in, and now it's time for me to go create that practice for myself, right? I think the biggest thing that has changed is that graduation year into an associateship, which kind of causes a little bit of a pause in the practice building portion while that associate learns and makes decisions. I actually think it's a really good process, because I think that when we do start a practice, our associates have learned more from their veteran doctors. They've learned more, especially in private practice associateship, as to maybe some of the bumps in the roads. And in a lot of cases, they've found a mentor, or they've at least found somebody they can bounce an idea off of. So I think the biggest thing has changed is that associateship pathway coming out of school, where, especially early in my career, that wasn't as prevalent. And now it seems to be the predominant factor.
Yeah. And there are always going to be quality private practice practitioners that are looking for good associates coming out of school to help build their practice, and that are willing to mentor them, because like good business leaders, bosses, practice owners are constantly training up future leaders, whether that's to take over their own practice, understanding that eventually the associate is going to launch out. Like, if you find a good mentor right out of grad school, it can help you tremendously learn from these people. Like it can help you learn from their mistakes, from their failures, from what they got right, to where maybe you can avoid some of the things that they did. Now, there's going to be some things you just got to get out there and learn, and everybody's going to be a little bit different, but they can help set you up for success, because they may have tried this and it didn't work, or tried this business tactic, because that's to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like the biggest learning curve for these practitioners coming out of grad school is not how to care for patients. It's not how to understand the cases that are brought to you. It's the business side. I know in my grad school, I got minimal business training, and I'm sure it's the same in the dental industry as these practitioners are coming out. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is if you look at the rankings of the dental schools, and there's a lot of metrics that are in play there, but one of them for sure is, business courses that are offered during dental school, during the doctorate program. And you look at places like Florida and Michigan, University of Florida, University of Michigan are highly rated. And a lot of times it's that metric of the business school, right? And so I think what we fail to understand is, you have an undergrad degree, and that undergrad degree might be in science. That's predominantly the degree. And then you apply to dental school and you get in, and there's a lack of just overall business knowledge. And then all of a sudden, you graduate, you've got debt that you've taken on to get through that education to better yourself. And yet some of the business concepts, haven't been exposed to you. Right. And so, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that first home buyer, right? I've got plenty of friends that are in the real estate industry, and they talk about first time home buyers, and it's, how much better are you, after the first sale, and it's the same thing here in the fact that, I get out of dental school and maybe I know exactly what I want to do. And I'm blessed that I know that, but maybe I don't have the confidence to make those business decisions because I don't have that experience. And that's where I think it's just so critical. Like we said before, dive into your network. If you've got a mentor that you're in associateship with right now, if you've got a professor from the school that you can lean on, if you've been exposed to someone in the professional ranks, like, yourself, Rusty, or someone within CAR, or, somebody within the banking industry, or a financial planner, a CPA, diving into that network, and being willing to raise your hand and say, hey, this is what I want to do, or this is what I think I want to do. And I need some help understanding maybe some of the concepts that I don't have confidence in. I just think that's the biggest thing in our industry outside of the associateship, is the associateship paired with those strong business concepts and having the confidence in making those decisions.
Yeah, and there are so many clubs and schools too. Like I know here locally at UT, they have a business club. And so get involved in those because they're going to bring in quality speakers. I've spoke to that group, not saying I'm a quality speaker, but I have spoke to that group at UT, but bring in quality speakers that you can learn from as well. And you may find a mentor there, finding local study clubs with other dentists in the area that you can connect with and network with. You just never know who's in your network. And what I've learned in my time in this career, Matt, and I'm sure you can attest to this more so than me, dentistry is a very small world. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody's connected. And so if you can get out there and start networking with your peers and colleagues in your area, you're going to learn who are the most trusted supply reps, trusted real estate agents, trusted attorneys, financial planners, CPAs, insurance agents, things you may not even be thinking about. But you're going to learn from your network who those trusted advisors are and know who works well within your industry. And so to your point, man, building that confidence, both from learning as an associate and from networking. If you don't take anything away from this first segment of our conversation, make sure you're building a very strong network in your area to help you along this process, because you can't go at it alone for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to further that point, if the doctor that comes out of school isn't successful, our industry is not going to be successful. And the overall oral health is too important to too many people for us to get it wrong. We've really got to make sure that we stand up for not only our industry, but oral health, overall. And that comes in so many different ways. But the one thing that it does come directly in is the next generation of doctors coming out and being successful.
100%, man. 100%. And so, all right, we've talked about starting up a practice. We understand kind of got to build a network, got to find the right key players. We've made the decision. We're going to start our own practice. Maybe we've been an associate for a while. Maybe we're going to go out on a limb as a new grad. When you first connect with these young doctors or older doctors or whoever's looking to launch their own practice, what do those initial conversations look like? And what questions are you asking to understand what they need?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a critical time, right? So you're talking about an associate or a doctor maybe that's ready to step off into that venture of owning their own practice. I think the first question that I always try to ask is, again, what does success look like? Is that I want to live in a rural environment and, I want to be, a major provider to my community, and my community is a major force in my life. And so maybe I want to live in a smaller area and support a community. Maybe that is, hey, I want to be able to support my family and give back to, my church or my charity. And I want to produce more dollars to be able to do that. So I think, those are just a couple of examples that come to mind. But I think the first thing is, what does success look like? And then how do we plan for that? And in planning for that, it really becomes how do we go through the steps in the right way? And my initial thing is, once we understand the plan, we build that plan out strategically, and we make sure that we understand what is the first year look like, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then what I call the veteran transition. Once you get post 10 years, and as you build that 1, 3, 5, 10, and then veteran transition, then you're going to find those people that you need to bring in. Right. And so if the concept is, I want to go left, then there's a certain amount of people that I know that I need to take down this path to introduce that doctor, to give them the best chance of success. If it's I want to go right, well, that could be some of the same people, or it could be different people based on the path. But my job is to really make sure those doctors have everything at their disposal to make great business decisions. Mm-hmm. I tell people all the time, I don't make a single decision. And I get a lot of laughs for that. And it's kind of an easy way to get a cheap laugh. But the truth is, we don't make any decisions. What I try to do is sit in the back of the bus, and the doctor is driving, he or she, and I just try to help them navigate the path.
Yeah. And that's where we work collaboratively together, because in those initial conversations, and we've had those before with prospective clients, where we say, hey, we want to know where you're going. Here's how Matt can help you get there. Here's how Rusty can help you get there. Because I help a ton on the front end. That's where I come in like the most handy, is at the very beginning. And then once we get the real estate situation figured out, then I turn them over to you as a trusted advisor to kind of lead them down that path towards that veteran transition, where you're working that 1, 3, 5, 10-year plan to build this practice of their dreams. You know, they went and invested a lot of time, effort, and money in it in grad school. Why not set them up for success? And so partnering with people like you have been easy for that. And so we're kind of talking about the business path now. What about from like an equipment, merchandise, supply side? Like when you're first getting started, like you see people, I'm sure there's people that are like, I got to have all these like pieces and all this stuff and the Cadillac package. And then there's like a middle ground, or there's a bare bones. Like, what does that look like for new practitioners starting their own practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to what type of dentistry do they want to do? First and foremost, right? If you tell me, hey, I want to do, very restorative general dentistry, then there's going to be certain things that are going to support that, right? If they tell me, hey, I want to do, general dentistry mixed with cosmetic, or I want to do general dentistry mixed with, I don't want to refer anything out. I want to make sure I do all my own endo and all my own, implant, and, maybe mix in some ortho. We're going to build that around the procedure mix, right? Obviously there's a certain amount of supplies that we just have to have, right? Like you can't do dentistry without having anesthetic and cotton rolls and all those things. And so we're going to put that into budget, but we're also going to make sure that, we're working with the bank, the lender, on what does that look like from an equipment standpoint. I don't need to go sell them, a state-of-the-art scanner that really focuses on orthodontics if the doctor's like, you know what, I don't want to do clear aligners and I don't really want to do brackets and bands. That's overkill. But if the doctor says, hey, you know what, I really want to be able to choose my endo that I do, and I want to be able to do some implant, well then, we've got to have a conversation about, really, really good, 3D cone beam, so that they have what they need to be able to diagnose effectively and efficiently. So it really comes down to the procedure mix, which again, not to sound like a broken record, it goes back to what does success look like and what am I trying to build towards?
Yeah, absolutely. What about from like a new doc that comes in and they're on a limited budget and they're like, look, I just can't, like, I can't afford all this stuff. Like, where do I start? How do you help kind of guide them when there's just that fear of the budget?
Yeah. And what's interesting is, we have seen some of the manufacturers really tie into this, and I'll use, some of the traditional equipment manufacturers as an example here. Many of them make different lines and different series of equipment. And so, maybe it's hey, look, if I'm running a cosmetic dentistry deal and I'm running a med spa type environment, maybe I need the ultra leather and, the massager in the chair. Right. And that's amazing. Right. And that's a great, comforting experience for patients. But if I'm looking at it and I'm saying I'm going to do general dentistry, and I really want to make sure that I keep things in a very manageable overhead, well, then there are series of traditional equipment we can go to that are not the highest end of the highest end, right? There's also really interesting things that a lot of the dental banks are doing to help those startups and help those young doctors in terms of financing. So a lot of times it's a mixing of all of the components. Can we do something with the bank to really ease the lending, to allow them to cash flow quicker? Can we do some things on the equipment side? Are there ways that we can, kind of bring in the supplies on budget, so that, maybe the first year we're really trying to emphasize, managing of overhead to create cash flow, right? And again, those are all things that go into that strategic plan, right? If we know where we're headed, we can plan for it on the front side so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to bring up a topic that's probably not a lot of fun to talk about because nobody wants to go into business thinking about, oh, I'm not going to succeed or I'm going to fail. But what are some like potholes, pitfalls, and tripping points that you've seen early in practices that people should look out to and avoid?
Yeah. So the first thing I tell everybody is if you look at the national averages, 97% of doctors that come out of dental school are a success. Okay. Not so we're talking about a really high success rate, right?
That'll get you to Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's right. That's better than 3 out of 10, right?
Yeah.
But no, so the first thing I try to do is explain to young doctors that, you're going to have a higher success rate, which generally will bring stress and pressure down. Right. And I feel like the biggest hurdle for some of these doctors is truly the pressure, the stress, and making good, confident decisions. Again, a lot of them have a heavy debt burden coming out of school. So what can we do to reduce that stress to free the mind up to make a good decision? Right. That's the first thing. Some of the pitfalls that we see, going into an associateship and getting into a bad partnership, right? Going in and the associateship, really maybe there were some red flags there for a number of reasons, but you weren't necessarily ready to go do your own thing or ready to step out of that associateship. And so you get into a bad partnership for whatever that reason might be. That's the one that I see the most, right? The second one is, I need to go be in the really hottest urban market, right? And I'll use this one as a great example. Being a native Memphian and living down the road from Nashville and watching that transition, right? Nashville has done amazing things and they're continuing to do amazing things. And our great city of Memphis is doing great things too. But so many times I think doctors come out and they see the lights and the glam and all the things and they see the cosmetic cases being done and all of a sudden it's like, you know what, I really need to be in this urban market to be successful. When if you actually go do a little bit of a strategic plan, you'll see, and this falls right into the things that you and I have talked about in the past, Rusty, you'll see that what's that price per square foot on your lease? What's that price per square foot to build out a practice? Whether it's, from the ground up or whether it's, I'm taking over a space and going to remodel it. What do those taxes look like? What's the PPO network? A big thing people don't think about is, if you're the first doctor to enter a market on the PPO, you probably got a really good deal. But if you're the last one to enter on that PPO contract, I don't know how great a deal you're getting on that PPO contract, right? And so things like that where, they're looking at it saying, well, this is where I want to be. And they're not taking the strategic plan into account, right? Because a lot of times our most profitable, our most, successful doctors are the ones that maybe they're in Nashville or maybe they are in Memphis, but they've taken all of those parameters into play. They haven't just said, this is where I want to be and I'm going to make this work. No, it's okay, let me look at all the pieces of the puzzle and how do they fit together.
Oh, that's such a beautiful point. And you and I've had this conversation a couple of times just around like, yeah, everybody wants to go to Nashville because it's who didn't want to be, in the Gulch area, these different places that are so cool in Nashville, right? But when you start looking at that price per square foot and it's double, triple what you could get in Memphis or Munford or Brownsville or some of these other smaller communities that are a day's drive to Nashville or, that you can go and spend a weekend up there, but you could really own a small town or rural county. Here in Memphis, there's about to be a massive turnover in the dental market. I've said it on this show before. We're at a kind of a fulcrum point for the Memphis dental market where the average age of the dentist is getting up there and they're looking for associates and people to come in and buy their practice. We have a mutual friend in Ryan LaPrade who is always looking for dentists that are looking to purchase practices in Memphis because he has several clients here that are looking to retire, and you could get a really good deal on a practice here in Memphis. Is it as fun and sexy as Nashville? No, but you don't have the traffic. You don't have to deal with all the Bridezillas downtown. You don't have to deal with all the things that come with Nashville, but you can go spend a weekend up there if you want to. Talk a little bit about that. You and I have discussed this a few times. What does it look like going into a more rural market to really capitalize on the things you just discussed?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, creating cash flow and profitability early on, the numbers speak to, the rural market, right? If you just do a case study on it, what you're going to find is, because of all those factors you talked about, because of the overhead that you're talking about, the rural market just doesn't have the overhead that the urban markets have. The urban markets are more competitive for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of influx of industry that create that. But there's also, in the rural markets, we've got, let's call it, in some situations, less than desirable areas when compared to a Nashville or an Atlanta or Chicago or some of these areas. So what we see is just the ability to be profitable and successful quicker, right? That's the first thing. Now, there are some things you have to pay attention to, right? You have to pay attention to that market. We dealt with, in a couple of situations, Union City, Tennessee comes to mind, which was, one of Goodyear's largest areas. And I dealt with this in my career where, Union City was a budding town, but it was really on the back of Goodyear and their subsidiary companies. And when Goodyear came out of Union City, now we've got a vacuum of people. We've got a vacuum of a lot of things, right? So you just got to make sure that when you're going to these rural markets, you really understand the market you're going into. Am I going into an area with, highly, agricultural, where I'm going to have a lot of people that maybe they don't have dental insurance and they want to be a cash paying patient, right? Which is, there's many states, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, that come to mind, or am I going into a market where I've got a major provider of jobs and I need to understand their dental insurance and their PPO, right? If I go into that dental market with a major provider that is, providing, 30, 40, 50% of the jobs in a market, well, then I can't go in there and not accept that PPO. So I've got to build that into my business plan. I've got to understand that, my crown fee is going to be this. My production on my top 20 procedures is going to be limited to these fees, because I'm going to have to accept whichever insurance provider that is that's provided via that employment vehicle, right? So it comes with a lot of profitability. It doesn't change the fact that here we are again, and we're a couple questions in, and I'm going back to, what does success look like and how do I build that strategic plan?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's key too to realize that, yeah, like it sounds fun and sexy. Like I can go to Nashville and I can charge more, and I can people pay more, and all these different things that come with that. But then you look at a place like Nashville, and maybe it's a flooded market. Maybe there's a lot of people in your specialty, whether that be cosmetic or pros or ortho, whatever you're trying to do. What if you could go open a couple of practices in a Union County? You mentioned that near Medina, Martin, up through that way. What if you could go open a few practices in, Alcorn County or Lee County down in Mississippi, where it's maybe not quite so heavily populated. And instead of having one cash cow, you're diversified. You're looking at real estate in a few different places. You have several dentists working for you. You have a couple practices that can be bringing you money. But it all goes back to what you said, making sure that you're doing the case studies, understanding what that market is to avoid those pitfalls that you talked about. Because if you fail to prepare to fail. And that's what this whole conversation is about with starting these practices, is just do your homework and understand what markets you want to be in, what specialty you want to be in, and understand the key players in your market, like Matt, like I'm trying to be here in the Mid-South as we're looking to grow here. A few more questions for you. So looking at these practices as they're opening, you probably helped bring on associates. We've been talking about when you're an associate and then you're looking to branch out. What about those that are starting their practice? They're finding some success. They're getting busy. Talk about kind of what that inflection point looks like for when it's like, okay, now it's time to bring on an associate, bring on another dentist into my practice to help me grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about doctor busyness, right? So if we want to say that, a traditional general practice is going to be a doctor, maybe an assistant or two, hygiene, one or two hygienists, we're talking anywhere from 3 to 5 ops. That doctor has got to determine what kind of production they can do. And we schedule for production, right? You know, I can see a patient load, and if it's all, you know, one type of production, then I can pretty much tell you where our production and collection and profitability is going to come in at. If I start to add procedures to that mix, no matter what those procedures are, maybe it's, you know, endo or ortho or implant or whatnot. Now we can also look at that production and watch that collection grow. So it's about that doctor busyness, right? If I've got metrics in terms of, you know, if I'm running one hygienist and she's booked out for 3 months, and then I turn around and I look and I say, okay, my first ability to, you know, do a crown coming out of hygiene in for 5 weeks, and hygiene's booked out for 3 months. Okay, now we've got a situation where, you know, we may want to look at having a doctor come in, and maybe that's not a full-time associate. Maybe that's opening up some hours. But it starts with the doctor production, the hygiene production, and where does that inflection roll over? You know, traditionally a hygienist can see 8 patients, a doctor can see 8 patients a day, you know, for running hour appointments. If we shave that down to 45-minute appointments on the hygiene side, you know, that changes the math. But as we start to look at things like total number of active patients, how many hygiene appointments we're having, how many exams we're doing, you dive into the metrics. And again, the numbers don't lie, right? They're going to tell us exactly where we are and then how far we're booked out. You start to put these metrics together and you start to build a case of when is it time to add that associate? You know, I don't want my patient to feel like they can't get in to see their doctor. If my patient feels like they can't get in to see their doctor, my patient will turn into somebody else's patient pretty fast.
Exactly.
Right. And so we've really got to look at the metrics. And that's where, again, building that strategic plan, but an additional step of looking at the metrics, you know, every 6 months, every year, you know, or bringing in a third party program that'll help me manage those metrics, you know, on the monthly. Right. But those numbers will not lie. They will tell you exactly where you are.
That's exactly right, man. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I mean, we could talk about this all day, so we're definitely going to have you back on some future episodes. But as we start to kind of wind down here today, what are some habits that you have observed or seen that sets the most successful practices apart? Again, having helped countless throughout the years open up, what are some habits or things you've seen that separate the best from the best?
Man, the number one thing for me is never stop learning. Never stop learning. My most successful clients that are reaching their goals and doing the things they want to do, both professionally and personally, are not afraid to raise their hand and say, I don't know what I don't know. And man, I'm so impressed by some of those veteran doctors that, you know, have seen a ton, and maybe they're in their late 50s, early 60s, maybe they're in their 70s. And, you know, they stand there and they say, you know, I've got this young person that's coming in. Maybe it's a Rusty Witten, you know, who's got a different background than your traditional car rep. But you know what? I can learn something from this individual because they do have a different background, right? By far, the number one factor for me is being able to continue to learn and being open to ideas, not being closed off and saying, you know what, I've seen it, I've done it, you know, I'm too down the path. No, you know what, if somebody comes in and they've got a different idea, let me hear that idea out, you know, and by far that's the number one trait.
Absolutely, man. That's in any profession. That's such a good word. I'm going to clip that and put that on social media just for anybody, because like the day you stop learning is you've begun your decline. Like you have to continuously be open to new ideas and fresh ideas. Don't be a dinosaur, get stuck in the past. That's such a good word. As we start to wrap this thing up here, I've got some rapid fire questions. I want some quick answers from you. Okay. I'm going to put you on the spot with a couple. I want some quick answers here. All right. All right. Lease or buy?
Buy.
Attaboy. New build or second generation dental space?
Depends.
Explain. I'll give you explanation on that one.
Again, it goes back to strategic planning. You know, if you tell me you can buy the real estate in a rural market and you can build it out, and I understand how that's going to fit strategically, great. If you tell me that you got a wonderful deal on a second gen property, and it's in the right location and it fits your business model, great.
Attaboy. Good. How about the favorite piece of technology that's changed dentistry?
3D cone beam.
Oh, nice. One purchase every dentist should make.
3D cone beam.
That might be easy.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not 3 for 3 here. What is the one purchase that every dentist regrets? Or do you have one? You may not have one, but
you know, I don't know about regrets. Yeah, that's a toughie.
Yeah. I'm gonna say maybe too fancy of a coffee machine where people kind of hang out back there.
Yeah, maybe
instead of doing it. Yeah.
The coffee in the waiting room thing, right? That's probably a miss, right? You see a lot of them. You see a lot of them, and I don't know that many of them even have water in them.
Yeah, exactly. How about the biggest myth about opening a dental practice?
I can't.
That's so good. Favorite vacation spot?
Personally, or did I hear from doctors?
Personally. We're gonna do a few personal ones to wrap it up. Personally.
Favorite vacation spot, man, the Gulf Coast. Man, I'll take the Gulf Coast all day.
Attaboy, hard to beat. Are you a reader?
I try to be. I try to be. I try to practice what I preach and continuing my own education.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a business book that you've read that really opened your eyes?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a business book per se, but the biggest thing that has opened my eyes has been studying Warren Buffett. You go read. Buffett's put out so many things over the course of his career from start to finish. And CNBC has done a great job of chronicling his career. Man, go look at some of the things that he's talked about and some of the things that he said. I think you'll learn a lot.
Solid. Last one. Describe your perfect Saturday.
Depending on the time of the year.
That's a good answer.
Depending on the time of the year, man. If it's in the springtime, man, it's hard to beat a sack of boiled crawfish and a baseball game.
Yeah, that's strong, man. That's strong. All right, man. Last question, and I'll let you kind of do your pitch here. But if a young dentist called you tomorrow and said, "Look, I'm ready to own my own practice. What should I do first?" Walk us through that first conversation and how you specifically can help.
Yeah, I think the very first conversation is, where can we sit down and where can we talk about your vision and your goal and build a strategic plan? I mean, that's the very first conversation. And where I think I can help is pulling in that group of professionals, kind of like a spoken hub, right? If you want to say that, we start somewhere and we start to add professionals, right? So if that doctor says, "Hey, this is the plan, we've built the plan. Okay, now we need to go fund the plan." Then we need to, if we're talking real estate, we need to talk about SBA lending. If we're talking about lease space, we got to talk about traditional. If we're going to go find a piece of property, then, I need to get Rusty Witten involved. If, we need to do lending, I need to get some lenders involved. Do we need a financial planner? Do we need a CPA? Do we need an architect? Do we need a dental attorney? Man, so many times, man, we miss the dental attorney. And there's some great ones out there. So, man, if I get that phone call, let's sit down, let's have a cup of Black Rifle and let's build a strategic plan.
Attaboy. Awesome, man. We'll tell the people where they can find you specifically, Matt. I'm going to link your contact information down here in the show description, but tell them more about you and how they can get a hold of you if they have questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. Rusty's going to put out my email on my cell phone. Man, give me a call, right? Let's talk about your plan. Let's talk about moving you closer to what success looks like and further away from those stresses and those things that hold you back, right? Yeah. Let's sit and talk about a strategic plan that's going to get you to where you want to be in the next 1, 3, 5, 10 veteran presence in your market.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you again for the time today, man. I really appreciate it. This was a ton of fun. This will not be the last conversation we have here. Really enjoyed this. I learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Yeah, Rusty, I appreciate it, man. And go Dogs.
Yeah, man. Go Dogs, man. Listen, if y'all have any questions, again, Matt's contact information is down here in the show description, as is mine, and the link to find a car agent in your neighborhood. If you don't take anything else away from today, it's start the conversation. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you can do until you talk to the right people who have done it before and can support you through this transition. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Coffee and Contracts. We appreciate your time. Appreciate you being here. Remember to drink your coffee, protect your profits, and we'll see you back here next time on Coffee and Contracts.